My journey to promote, celebrate, and uplift women started a long time ago. It started through my celebrity TV show, The Basia Show. I quickly realized that my purpose was so much more than simply interviewing celebrities. I've always wanted to build a global network to elevate women, but I was afraid. So one day, I realized that I already had the platform and I just needed to be my authentic, vulnerable self. So I decided to call up some queens from around the world, and they all agreed to pull up. That was the moment we launched the Ask Basia video podcast, and we're just getting started. We're going to change this game. We're going to teach women how to treat each other and how to treat themselves right. You feel me?
Hey guys, it's your girl Basha. And once you see us, that means one thing. It's Tuesday and it's time for the Ask Basha video podcast. Today our topic is raising children without biases. Are you born with a predisposition to be biased, or were you groomed to be biased? Perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is racial bias, but the biases to which we refer to today are much broader than that. It refers to disabilities, gender, sexual, political, and religious bias. Today, I'm joined by some amazing ladies on the Ask Basha video podcast, and they will share their experience with biases and their own opinions on the origins of biases. I'd like to welcome back to the top right. Well, let's just see. Top right, Mrs. Maua Mosha Aline, who is currently located in Tampa, Florida. Maua Mosha is a public health specialist who is currently serving as a senior biostatistician, at a pediatric hospital research department. She's also Tanzanian, and she's an African print designer who uses her passion for African print to change the narrative about Africa. Her work is available on YouTube under Ma Afri Styles. I'm also saying welcome back to bottom right, Dr. Sidel Ross, who is located in New Jersey. Dr. Sidel Ross is Trinidadian American. She's an anesthesiologist and pain specialist. She's triple board certified and currently practices palliative medicine in New Jersey. She's also a classically trained vocalist who uses music to care for patients living with life-threatening illnesses. Dr. Ross's podcast, Prescription in Sound, is dedicated to promoting awareness of the healing potential of music and is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We're saying welcome back to my girl in Brooklyn, New York, Dr. Marie Romney. Marie Law Romney currently serves as the Vice President of Operations for New York Presbyterian Columbia University Irving Medical Center, the #1 hospital in New York and #4 in the nation per US News. Tasked with overseeing a workforce of 1,900 plus employees and an operational budget of $350 million in the aftermath of a global pandemic, Marie is focused on rebuilding employee engagement, streamlining clinical operations, and increasing outpatient volume to drive revenue recovery and growth. Dr. Romney holds an undergraduate degree from Cornell University, a medical degree from Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, and a master's of business administration degree from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. A Team Steps Master Trainer with Lean Silver certification, Dr. Romney enjoys leading interdisciplinary teams to drive meaningful change to help improve healthcare delivery. Ladies, welcome back to the Ask Basha podcast. It's an honor to have you. I know how tired you are. We were talking about that before the show started. I feel it for you. I feel guilty, but I'm honored to have you back on our panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is it possible to raise children without biases? We're hitting the ground running today. I'm going straight to New York City, and I'm starting Dr. Marie Romney. I'm starting with you.
Yeah.
Tell us, Queen, Is it possible at all to raise children without biases?
You know, Basia, I tried to think of a way to answer yes, but unfortunately, after much contemplation, the answer is no.
It's a trick question. It's a trick question, but I wanted to see how honest my queens were.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, we try our best as parents, but there's what you say, and then there's how you behave, and our children know us better than anyone, and you surprise on the unspoken cues that they pick up on. And which I'm learning now, having a 13-year-old who I asked this question to, and he was like, of course, Mom, you have biases.
I wasn't so brave to ask mine.
Yeah, you know, and I think what it is, at least for me, at least the way I think I've justified it is I try to prepare them for what's to come. And so it's often trying to balance, not transferring your own experiences and assuming that those have to be theirs, but at the same time not wanting them to be blindsided. And as you said, that could be related to gender, that could be related to race, but either way, I think it's impossible because I think biases come from somewhere. It's a lived experience. It's just if they go unchecked, that's when you can run into problems.
Gotcha. Maua Moshe Alain, what do you say? Is it possible to raise children without biases?
I'm totally biased. Totally biased, and I capitalize on the first 7 years of their lives to bias them as much as possible towards whatever I feel is for their best.
I love an honest queen.
Oh, I will keep it honest. So I've done everything I could from language, you know, having them prefer my native language, having them prefer being Tanzanian, you know, having them not forget that they're African, even though they, you know, they're mixed kids with other nationalities. But at the same time, I've done everything I could to bias them. But as Dr. Ramya said, I have to be careful in the way of how I am. It's almost like programming, right? So I have to make sure that I don't go too much to the point that they can't have their own say.
Yeah.
Because they will be challenged.
Well,
right?
we will get into that some more later. You know, I don't want you to say too much at this point.
Okay.
You
but
know,
yes, I am biased.
You're biased. That's all I want to know, because we need to know where we're starting from. We need to start from a position of truth. Right? Dr. Sidel Ross.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the 411?
I mean, I completely agree with what has been said up until now. I understand it. You would like to think that you're raising unbiased kids, but chances are you're not, because I know I can speak for myself as a parent, right? That my child has a lot of exposure to me and the things that I say and I do, right? In fact, I'm the first. Their father, and I were like the biggest influences in their lives right now.
And especially during COVID.
And so, and given that I hold a lot of biases, you know, it would be unreasonable of me to expect that my kids aren't being raised with biases themselves.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. And if I was to answer with the same approach, and I were to be honest, of course I'm raising my kids with which West Indian mother is not raising her kids with biases?
Yeah.
You all, well, Maua has West Indian affiliation by marriage, but we all have West Indian, we were raised as West Indians, West Indian parents, we just have a different approach. And West Indian parents, especially West Indian mothers, will make sure you're biased in some form or the other, right? You know, because I really gave a lot of thought to this topic. I mean, let me just say, ladies and gentlemen, listening and watching, I am not an expert at this topic, right? Yeah. I'm not. I may get it wrong, but I'm going to talk the truth. And I think it's important for us to say from the get-go to define what a bias is. So I'll ask you all, and I'll start with Dr. Sidel Ross. Can you just briefly define the bias? so that I can also give a little more in terms of what I think about, is being biased a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
So define it, and no, don't tell me if it's a good thing or a bad thing just yet. We'll define it, and then we'll go into causes, or
Okay.
if it's inherent and so on. So how would you
Yeah.
define a bias?
I think a bias is a tendency to kind of have either a positive or negative attitude towards someone or something, right? Not saying whether it's, so you notice differences, and then you come up with your own kind of way of determining if those differences are good or bad
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody agree with that definition?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have nothing to add to that. It's just that I think a lot of people don't realize that, what causes it? Let's go to that. Like, what causes? What you think causes bias? Because I don't think we're born biased, or are we? The doctors first, Dr. Romney, what do you think? Are we born biased?
No, I think we're born with a pretty clean slate, but I think it can probably settle in a lot sooner than we think. And I think it's a combination of things that biases are born from. Some can be repeated experiences, and so you try to draw a connection or identify a pattern so that you can draw a conclusion. And then I think the other way can be just if you have a very, very traumatizing or strong experience with something, it can cause feelings to set in, even if it's one instance. For you to say anything similar, you kind of associate as being the same. You know what I mean? Protective mechanisms.
What do you say, Mawali?
I agree with what the definition is and where the cause is. Speaking for myself, I think I would say a lot of my biases comes from just upbringing, who I was born into, which family I was born into. And as I've said, a lot of times, the first few years of experience in life, that's where you learn the most, because you come in with a clean slate.
Yeah.
So that gives you that bias that eventually gets challenged, and either you change, you modify, or you abandon things.
So would you say a bias is a good thing or a bad thing? This is where we're getting sticky now.
Right. So it depends on what it is, right? So if I have a bias towards avoiding people of certain color, that's not a good thing, right? It takes away from me knowing a whole group of people based on their tone. It doesn't make any sense.
Correct.
But if I say, I am biased towards African food, anything, I prefer African food, right?
Yes.
So
it's really a cultural bias. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it's almost like preference.
Dr. Ross, is it a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that it depends on the circumstance, certainly, right? A lot of the biases that kind of exist in society today, you might say, are not good. So when we look at, of course, the racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, those kinds of biases that exist probably are not positive, not helpful, and kind of prevent us from enjoying the richness and fullness of life, which is kind of what is getting to what Miss Moshe Elaine was just describing, that those kinds of biases take away from your enjoyment of life and getting to know others and really living a full, rich life. But then there's some other things that may be positive and don't necessarily have a negative impact on yourself or anyone else. And that's where I think the difference comes. The real issue is, if your bias can have a potentially negative impact on yourself or on other people, then that's a problem.
Correct. Because, and I agree with what you've said, there's nothing to disagree with. Because to me, a bias can be favorable, right? As a parent, I have a teenage son. If I have a bias towards him not hanging out with the wrong crowd, and if I see certain people whose dress code is consistent with deviance and so on, I ain't gonna lie, that's gonna be my bias. It is not on the basis. No, I'm keeping it real, just like you. It's not on the basis of the color of that person.
Right.
So we were taught to dress a certain way, so we're biased towards that because this way says you are professional. This way says you are worthy of being hired. This way says you are classy. Whatever the labels are, and no matter what we try to do, that is what we see when we see someone present themselves before us. So as a parent, I am going to be biased based on destructive behavior. Now, to pick up on what Dr. Ross said, a bias becomes lethal when it manifests itself for malicious reasons. Now, that is not a bias that I would be proud of even in me. And that's not a bias I'm willing to support. I would not look at someone's child or a person or something and say, I don't want you to play with her because she looks that way. No, I'll be like, son, you may not want to be associated with that person because the way they're heading is because they seem to be leading a deviant path. They seem to be on the wrong road, or a life of, I've had this experience, praise God, to say to my son, but I'm just saying from a parent's point of view, that is a good bias to have. to be able to establish what's favorable behavior and what's unfavorable, what would lead down the wrong path and what would lead towards a more successful path. So for the most part, we'll put on the word again, we all have biases that are supposed to be, that are aimed at us being constructive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but it's interesting. Again, I was telling you as I spoke to my 13-year-old about this, it's an argument that I have had the opportunity to debate with him, something simple. Walking down the street, he wants to have music playing on his phone in his pocket. And so he and I are going back and forth. And, why can't I do this? The music I'm playing is inappropriate. I was like, it's because of the perception that it gives others. And so he said, well, that's not fair. And, as I'm thinking about it, it's true, it's not fair, but it is the reality of the world that we live in and the associations that we all make, the associations I make if I see, a tween or teenager walking down the street.
With your pants by your knee.
Exactly. However, it's a slippery slope, right? Because if you think about some of the biases that you mentioned, professional organizations or what the definition of looking professional looks like. Correct. I can remember the debate that I went through in getting my hair cut, I was relaxed, my hair was long, I fit the part, and I really for a moment was nervous. Well, should I wait until I'm in my new job before I go natural? Because is that considered acceptable? And so where does that fall on the spectrum, right? That we know is not okay. That we're going to push back against. But what I've landed on is, honestly, when you're a parent, it's like fair goes out the window. It's what's going to keep my kids safe, what's going to set them up for success. And so while I do not agree with the biases that kind of society uses to decide good, bad, safe, unsafe, your life depends on living by those rules. So you better learn those biases and make sure you're aligning with them.
I want to just pick up quickly on that point before I send it over to Maua, Elaine, and Dr. Sidal Ross. And for that reason, some of us need to forgive our parents in that there was a time when our natural hair would not have been the thing to appear unless you lived in Africa, and it was different there. But for the likes of North America and the first world countries, the so-called first world countries, it just was not the thing that they were thought, and that was their way of protecting us too. Yeah. Because that's what was taught to them. Like, the straighter your hair is, that natural look is not groomed, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard it. And so some experts came up with a lot of products that could really make our hair texture into the natural, beautiful style that it is. Because long ago, you couldn't even find things to present that. in public. If we're to keep it real, there wasn't anything made for coarse textures and so on, and the tighter curls and that kind of thing. So the bias was plausible to a point without saying. I think I depart from the bias if it was meant to suggest that we weren't beautiful with it.
Yeah.
Now that's where I depart from it. But in their own wisdom, they were also trying to protect us, like how we're trying to protect our sons and daughters walking down the road with the music. Pants need to be wet, supposed to be on your waist.
Exactly.
What do you think about that, Maura Aline, before I go to Dr. Sarah?
I mean, absolutely agreed. I think the key thing that Dr. Romney mentioned was keeping the children safe, right? A lot of my biases are just to make sure that they survive to see, their 18th birthday, 21st birthday,
their children's children.
Right, to see my children's children. So it comes without saying, I would do anything as a parent to bias them towards that.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember because I was by myself in the US for a long time and I left when I was young. And one of the things that kept coming to my mind whenever, I wanted to do whatever I wanted to do was, man, what would my mother say? And that paused me right there. And that is nothing but bias.
Yeah.
She had put these things into my mind to say, a young lady doesn't do this, and a young lady doesn't do that. And so I would catch myself. I said, what would my mother say? And that would just stop me. So I'm hoping that, whatever I instill in my children, they'll pause for a second and say,
yes, what would my mother
say?
I think my kids are saying that already, because sometimes they'll ask the father, what would mommy say? Dr. Sarah, what do you think?
I agree. I think some of the biases are important, they're necessary.
Correct.
And I think that's in some ways how, the purpose that biases serve, right? They help people kind of make sense of the world around them. And so that they try to then figure out how to survive in the world around them and how to thrive in the world around them. So you kind of make your impression, you form your impressions based on what you believe is best for yourself and for those around you, right? And so I agree that there's a purpose and a place for some of it.
Yeah.
Because we want to keep our kids safe. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and that's inherent in every mother, like that's what we're born with. Well, once you become a mother, that's it.
Right.
Yep. So for me, like one of the things that I want us to also recognize that biases can be in our body language. Now we're going through the different. At first, it leaves our minds. It first starts as thoughts, which then we lean strongly in favor of a preference. So whether it's a political preference, a religious preference, we are all living with biases. So if you're listening to this podcast or you're watching this podcast and you're leaning towards saying, oh, no, I have no bias, I have no idea what planet you're living on, it means that you don't exercise any form of preference. You're a robot. They tell you what to do. Because once you have an idea, once you support a political party, you wear your hair a certain way, you drive a certain car, you live in a certain neighborhood, newsflash, you live with biases. Yep. Because a bias exists when you have the opportunity to exercise a preference. Now it's how you go about that preference. If you go about that preference not respecting other people's preferences, right? Like, I know that as someone with a first degree in government and politics, I don't expect everybody to be a Republican or everybody to be a Democrat, because then we would not have democracy, first of all. So we all have political biases, but I'm not going to have a ridiculous argument and be upset with somebody because their bias is different from mine. It becomes destructive when we try to make each other feel that you don't have the right to a certain political thought. It becomes destructive if we make someone feel bad because they are Black. It becomes destructive if we make somebody feel bad because they are Asian. So like if you look different from that person. And I want to make this point in terms of coming back to body language. I heard this new A-list Asian star say something recently. I believe it was on The View. His name is Simu Liu. You're familiar with Simu Liu. He's new A-lister. I think the Shang-Chi is the Marvel movie that he's featured in. And you know, they were all talking about how amazing it is for them to see themselves on screen. And I so appreciate that for them. I'm not Asian, I don't look Asian, but I am happy for, I know what it is, and I to see your own, and I know that representation matters, you know, again, because of biases, but not, it's not a harmful bias to want to see someone like yourself, like a Lupita Nyong'o or Michael B. Jordan or somebody. It's a sense of pride. It doesn't mean that you don't like the other side or the other person. You just want to see everybody. So one of the things he said, and that made me feel a little sad. And I thought I would remember. I said, you know what, I have to bring this up in our podcast because we're talking about biases. And he talked about when he was a child, and even though people wouldn't say things directly to their face, to their faces, sorry, as Asians, he remembered the body language of the people who were dealing with his parents who couldn't speak English properly. And I thought, how powerful. And it was something attached to shame. Like he didn't say that he was ashamed, but he knew what the body language meant, based on how they were interacting with his parents. And that stayed with me, you know, and it stayed with me. And I said, okay, so we're going to be talking about biases soon. And we have to know that even though we're raising our kids with some form of bias, it is important for us as parents to make sure that we communicate that your bias is not meant to have malicious intent. This is just your preference. Somebody else is going to have a different preference. They're going to choose a different zip code. They're going to choose a different partner. They're going to choose, and you just respect them. We don't need to malign them. We don't have to be malicious. We just have to respect the fact that they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah. And from when I heard that, that made me, I was like, wow, you know? So what questions do we need to ask ourselves to determine whether our biases are in fact constructive or destructive? You know, are we open to people having different religious beliefs? It may differ from ours. Most of us, not all, believe in some form of God, divine. I would hope, and it does not exist, but I would hope most of us believe in good. But the way we choose to worship that divine power and so on is very different. Does it mean that yours is better than mine? You are bad because you're not in my church? You know, all these things can be destructive. I mean, we're raising our children to go out in the world to mix with everybody. And we want them to get along with everybody. How do we handle this? How do we decide? What questions do we need to ask to determine if our biases are constructive? Now, what, Elaine?
Oh, you have to start with me. Okay.
I'm starting with you.
You know, I think truly having children is it's an opportunity, right? For me, for things to be reflected, for myself to be reflected and to really see myself. And I say that because children, like the stage at least where my children are, they ask questions and they ask a lot of why, right? And you know that why we get so frustrated explaining why 100 times. Right? But it was the other day they said something. They were talking about some product or something, and then I jump into their conversation. It was none of my business, but I jump into their conversation and they were like, oh, Ma, there you go again. You're going to say this is from Tanzania. You know, I know you're going to say that is. And I was like, oh, my bias has really caught up with me, right? It seemed like I have put in so much, because my goal is always to make sure that they know, not just one side, but you really need to know this other history or information that you're not going to necessarily learn in school. It has to be orally presented to you, or I find facts for you and things. But they were like, Ma, we understand, but there's also this thing. So it was a great opportunity for me to be reminded that, okay, you have done your part. They are thinking for themselves, as little as that may be, but they are coming into themselves, right? They're beyond age 7 at this point. They've collected all the information, but now they're mixing and matching and figuring out what are we going to follow. Yeah. So that was a good reflection for myself, and saying, okay, am I still continuing with the biases that are not necessary at this point, or am I challenging them, asking them questions to challenge what they believe and understand, and can they present or represent themselves? So it was a good moment for me.
Yeah.
And it was a blessing in disguise. I mean, I shouldn't have jumped into that conversation anyways, but I got to learn.
Yeah.
And I had to be open to learning.
And I'll tell you, as someone with older kids, teenage kids, children can really check you up. And the older they get, they can check you up. The older you get, yeah. I remember my son checking me. That might have started from around 13, 14. Things that were not said for malicious intent, but he's like, nobody says this anymore. Nobody. I was like, thanks. No, but then it's an opportunity for me to say, like, hey, I don't know everything. That's why I'm educating you so well, so you can come back and teach me and keep me current. It's never too late for me to learn. So, I mean, can any of you ladies, Dr. Stalros, recount your first, I would say, encounter, your recollection of biases and how that affected your life? Why are you laughing?
It would not have been my first encounter for sure, because it happened in my adulthood. But one that really sticks out in my mind was my husband, in fact. So after we had dated for some time, he said to me, there's something I need to admit. He said, when I first saw you going into the hospital, the very first day I laid eyes on you, I was like, whoa, who is that new nurse? I've never seen her before.
Oh my God. Are you kidding?
100% the truth.
So what did you say? Tell us the truth now. Your husband referred to you as a nurse. Okay?
He thought I was a nurse. He said, and I went, he said, and I tried to keep up with you, but you were moving so quickly. I lost track of you. And I went to every floor asking them if they'd seen this new nurse who looks like this. He described me and everything.
Dr. Mary Mamney's face.
Oh my God.
And of course, nobody knew who this new nurse was.
I love it.
Never heard the story. I love it.
I love it. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
And so he tells me this after I had already fallen for him.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah, right? He knew, I guess he was smart enough to know that. And so now, when he and I have conversations now about this, I'm like, it's obvious that we really need to take stock of ourselves, because here you are. I mean, this was...
I never heard the story.
You were operating under this bias when you met me, this gender bias, right? At the very least, it was a gender bias, right? There could have been more to it.
Yeah,
at the very least, gender. And I said, and here we are now with 2 daughters.
And you don't want anybody to mistake them for a nurse, right?
Right. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
that's not what they want, right?
Yeah.
If they don't want to be a nurse.
Yeah.
Alea talks about wanting to be an orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah.
Her father.
Older daughter. Yeah. So what are you going to tell her? That's what if she wants to be an orthopedic surgeon, that's what she'll be. And there's no limitations, right? And
I'm just trying to figure out why you would think, is it the walk? Like that kind of West Indian walk?
Oh my gosh.
Isn't it posterior? Like the nurses have said.
Well, that was certainly a part of the attraction.
Yeah, that's what I was told.
Even that part.
Oh my
exactly.
God.
No, but so we talk about this from time to time. He and I, as we're raising these girls, we want them to be self-assured. We want them to, we want to minimize the biases as much as we can. We can't get rid of all of them.
Yeah.
But as much as we can, to the extent that we can, we should.
I'm smiling because I might have been the reverse of your husband, because when I met my husband, the first assumption is that he was not husband material. I've said this before on the show, and Dr. Ross knows that. I was like, there's no way a professional athlete could be husband material. No way. So I wasn't, as the saying goes, my name is Bennett, and I wasn't in it. I was like, I need a free dinner tonight. I'm going. But I so wasn't in it, because clearly this made absolutely no sense. How could this man be husband material? No, that was a bias. I was profiling the man's career.
Absolutely.
And here we are, happily 20 years later. So he laughs at me because I did not think, 21 years later, 20 years married in the coming week. But I did not think that this brother or anybody else in his field would be, especially at that age, would be considered any type of marriage materials. I was like just taking calls and filling time. I really was. I mean, I can say that and apologize and say shamelessly I was wrong. But it was a bias. So I can't get back with your husband because I had my own biases at the time. And I was like, hey, no athlete from me. Any one of you all have, no, serious? I was like, not at all. What am I going to talk to him about? All kinds of crazy things. And turned out to be the best guy I've ever met in the whole world. You understand? Crazy. And what about you guys with your spouses? Any reverse bias? Anybody had biases before we move on to our hot topics?
Yeah, mine was definitely similar. My husband was, first of all, a football player. We met in college. He had not been in a serious relationship the whole time we were there. I was good friends with his roommate, who was telling me, oh, don't play yourself, you're going to get hurt. And I was like, well, listen, I'm a big girl, I can handle it. And, here we are. And actually it was with that intention, because I was had been in a long-term relationship, and I told my girlfriend, I'm going to have this thing. He's graduating. I've never been kind of the, forgive me to say, like one night stand girl, but I'm going for it. And that didn't work out. Here we are. As you said, marriage.
We just love the Haitian queen, huh?
But you don't know. And going back to in terms of what you teach your kids, I think I said, trust but verify. People say that all the time. It's okay to have your biases, but don't rest your laurels on being so sure until you've checked. You have that in place, so you could come in with your eyes wide open, but still check, because sometimes you'll be surprised and pleasantly so.
21 years later, as Iyanla Van Zandt once wrote in her book, I thought this was an in the meantime relationship. I was like, in the meantime, let's do this. What about you, Marlene?
Me? Oh man, I had some biases. I think so. I remember talking to my mother. And I told her, Mama, I don't think I want to marry a Tanzanian. I'm from Tanzania. So I was like, I don't think I ever want to marry a Tanzanian. And I don't know why she reminded me of this. It was just, I think it was just embedded in me. And sure enough, I never did. Not for,
So you followed up on your biases.
But I had to check myself later on in life. I said, but why? And then in that revision, I understood why. Because I was exposed to something different, right? Yeah. In terms of exposure outside of the country, and I wanted a certain mindset of my partner, right? And I wasn't getting that at that point, so I was like, I'm not gonna do that. And then I ended up meeting a really great guy, and it's almost like it kind of, solidify my very weird bias.
That was your call?
But I mean, now I can't say it because I know I want to encourage anybody. Like, they're great guys, great Tanzanian guys. It's just I was looking for a particular type of personality and openness in someone, and at that point I wasn't getting it in the interactions I was having. So I just totally had this bias. It was totally wrong. But I'm happy.
But it's happy anyway. You got a Trini. You got a Trini.
Yep.
Happily so.
Talking about biases, ladies, I just want to shift a little bit before we go, because I need to sound off on last night VMAs. I don't know if any of you all got a chance. I just watched the highlights, and let me tell you something. I didn't work out for about 4 days, and after I saw Normani and Tiana Taylor's bad day, not body, their bad day, honey, I just got myself up. And I got to the gym. If you see a girl working out real early this morning, Monday mornings, I don't work out. I was like, nope, I'm not having it. There's no way. No money and Tiana Taylor alone should be looking like this. This is not right. I was like, Lord help us. Their body is on fire.
I need to check that out.
10 stars. Exactly. Listen, it was like, I'm like, Lord, why y'all come out here to make me feel bad this morning? I got to the gym so early. I started my week off right with an amazing workout. And honestly, outside of the future body benefits, it made me feel so good mentally, physically. It really kickstarts my day because I have a heavy load right now. And I was like, I think I might need to do this tomorrow morning again, but I have to go back and watch that picture.
The inspo.
Yeah, for the inspo. But that's what I'm signing off on this week,
Yeah.
So I want to remind everybody to go follow our queens at their Instagram handles, Ma Afri Styles, at Marie Romney MD, at Sidel Ross MD, and their Instagram profiles will be in the body of this article associated with this podcast. This is why we do this. We love this podcast, and what we love about it is that we are global and we bring queens together from around the world. You know, Maua Alain, she's in Tampa, Florida, but she's from Tanzania. Dr. Sidel Ross is in New Jersey, but she's from Trinidad and Tobago as well. And Dr. Marie Romney is from Haiti, Haitian ancestry, but she's in Brooklyn, New York. And your girl Basia from Trinidad and Tobago, but I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. Yeah. So just go follow them on their Instagram handles in the body of this broadcast. I wish we could go on and on, but all good things must come to an end. This is the reason we do this, to bring these women together. And I can't say every week you put a smile on my face. I'm in the most amazing company. I remember learning a few things about human beings very early in my professional life. You know, we want love. Two things we want: love and acceptance, and we're afraid of rejection. If that is truly the case, we should all be more tolerant and kinder to each other. We all want to be accepted and loved. However, the moments some of us are not willing to conform with the idea of love, spirituality, political ideals, physical acceptance, etc., or biases. Once we confront it with these differences, our biases get activated. Having a bias is not a bad thing. If it adheres to a standard, if it helps you to go further, a bias can be progressive, but it can also be destructive based on the intent of that bias. So on that note, remember to be careful what you say about each other, because it takes one to know one. And to quote my darling son Russ, ladies, you did a great job. Until next time, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. It's your girl Basia. Remember to live the life you love and love the life you live. I'm out. Bye, everybody. See you next time. We're going on hiatus, guys. So check out Instagram to see when we're coming back. We need a break. We see you. Bye. Yes.